Hello, this is Maniacal Cackle, and I'm pretty excited about Malifaux 2023. There's a lot of cool stuff happening, and I just wanted to share some of my thoughts on some of the formats that you can play to really make the most of your Malifaux experience in 2023. I imagine by the time you're all watching this, will be the new year, so Happy New Year to everyone. And also a big shout out to Dice Man for hosting my videos. Really appreciate it. So let's jump right into it. This is just some of my viewpoints on the game, especially from a competitive perspective. And so one of the things I'll be emphasizing a lot while I go over this stuff is the competitive balance of stuff. Is that's really, really important to competitive players. For a lot of players, those things aren't as important, though. For a lot of the time, what you're most looking for is for stuff to be fun, because of course that's why we play games. So I'm also going to mention some of those other aspects of gameplay as well. But I think what I could most add to the conversation is about commenting on game balance, etc. Um, so the first format to talk about, of course, is standard, and we'll talk about singles as well. But the standard format, as you probably know, it's anything goes. Whatever's in the rulebook is what you play. From Damien to Double Masters, it's a very high-powered, fun format. If you want to be doing wild, wild stuff, this is the format to do that. You can be using your Damien, who just deletes Masters in an activation. You can do your 30 card draw combo with Shen Long. You can run Zaw and Ophelia, or Zip and Ophelia, or Zip and Ma and Ophelia. Any of those overpowered combos. It's very, very powerful, and I think it's just going to be very wacky. I think that a lot of people are going to have a lot of fun with the Madness of Malifaux format, because that's just you can do such incredibly wild, powerful things. The downside is there's poor balance. Like some stuff is just straight up broken. Um, Especially so, me as a player, like I'm a little bit famous for um, uh, well, I'm not famous, but you know what I'm saying. I'm a little bit known for the ability to analyze a matchup and eventually crack it. Like, for instance, with the Nexus 2 matchup for a while, I analyzed it for a while and I found a very specific thing to defeat a very specific build. Um, Damien, I've been able to do that a little bit, but it's proving very challenging, especially before he starts teching, especially before you add in the Arcanist starter box, and Damien might not even be the strongest thing in this next batch of content. So a lot of stuff is just ending up very, very strong. And so that does ruin the competitive balance aspect for it a bit. And the downside to the high powered fun, where everybody is doing this super wild, super powerful stuff, is it also means you're on the receiving end of that super wild, super powerful stuff. So I think this is going to be a really good format to play, and everyone should play it a lot. Go ahead and play. We're all excited about the madness models, but I think that some people are going to get really sick of the game balance in those formats, and so I'm going to go over some of what I think some of the other options are. Because sometimes you just want to break. Say, if you play 10 tournaments in a year, like some of us do, uh, playing every single one of those, the standard format starts to get very boring, because you start to see a lot of the same top masters at the top tables every single time. The variety starts to go a bit down. That does bring up the singles format, where almost anything goes. Double masters are banned. It's more thematic, but it's, I think, still poorly balanced. It's still the same broken stuff. Most of the stuff that's really broken is the single masters, like Damien Shenlong, where whatever is going to end up being the strongest, it's probably going to be some of the single master stuff. Additionally, every single errata they actually address the double master format, so I don't think you can claim that double master format is less balanced or less errata than the other formats, because they clearly give attention to it every time. So I think the double masters format is as balanced as the singles master format. That said, the singles math format is more thematic. Many players just like it more. So, many people think it's more fun. And again, Malifaux is a game about fun. So I would really recommend the singles format. The time to play it is when you want to play it. That's the main thing. If people want to play singles, then play singles. Um, the next thing I want to talk about isn't quite a format, but it's close. I want to talk about gaining grounds all, because part of when we talk about these broken masters, what you actually experience is that they're broken in Gaining Ground 3. And Gaining Ground 3 tends to favor crews that are good at winning the fight. There's, of course, some exceptions, etc., but they tend to favor crews that are good at winning the fight. However, with Gaining Grounds All, this is, for those of you who don't know, it's all of Malifaux. It's, in my opinion, the best Gaining Ground. All Malifaux content for this edition is in this format. Even the holiday strategies are technically in this format. Um, there's huge variety. There's over a dozen strategies worth playing. There's like something like 30 different schemes. It's ridiculous. There's just a huge amount of variety, and that variety leads to better balance, right? Because it's difficult for a master to both be dominating, say, guard the stash, and also dominating symbols of authority. Those are two very different strategies. And then you've got, your break the line, which I personally think is much better than carve a path. You've got plant explosives. You've got, and sometimes you might get sick of cursed objects, and you want to do like a recover evidence, etc. There's just so many options. To me, this is the best Gaining Ground. Is just doing Gaining Grounds all. Wyrd is very good at game design, and what this format does is it allows you to experience all of their game design across this edition, and it gives that variety, and you get combos. And so I think this format is best when you're curating. For best results, you want to curate your pools. Lately, I've been doing a lot of randoms with friends, but you get the best results when you curate your pools. So what you can do, for instance, is I was setting up a tournament in this format, and one of the things I did is I said, I'm going to take 5 ski marker schemes, or you can do, I want to score 5 schemes that you score on the center line, because that's actually possible in Gaining Grounds All. There's just so many options to make these really niche pools. And one of the things I found really exciting is, for instance, Anya 2 is sometimes a really good master in the Gaining Grounds All format, because if you have a 5 ski marker pool of like 5 tricky ski marker things, suddenly she looks really good. She's actually like a really solid master, and it's rare for people to talk about, like, say, Anya 2 and those types of masters. And to me, that's what is so amazing about this format. It unlocks these masters that we don't get to see performing normally. People talk about Castor 1, the Castor Awakened, and he has some ski marker tricks, and it's very likely that there's some of these older pools that he's probably actually better at than Gaining Grounds 3. And same thing with Ling Li of 10 Thunders. People are worried maybe she's not that powerful, but when I look at it, I think she's got a lot of powerful stuff. It just may not fit GG3. So for me to really unlock the content that Malifaux offers, Gaining Grounds All is just a phenomenal experience. I recommend it to anybody who's playing lots of Malifaux. It's really awesome. It's the best way to play for players like me, not for everyone. And in fact, I will emphasize it's better for experienced players. Experienced players will be able to handle the variety. I was looking at organizing some tournaments where some of the players don't play as much as me, and that was actually part of the feedback I got, is they were like, oh, it's hard enough keeping up with a single Gaining Grounds. We don't want to keep track of a dozen strategies and 30 different schemes. And so what I did for that tournament is I did 4 Gaining Grounds 3 pools, and I did a single Gaining Grounds All pool to mix things up. So even if you're looking at, say, a crowd that's not as expert at the game as people who play 10 tournaments a year, you can still mix in a little bit, but you want to be careful. You don't want to overwhelm your player base with some really wild stuff, because some people don't have all the strategies and schemes memorized. So this is something to do for experienced players, and if you're doing it for players who are not familiar with the entire Gaining Grounds All format, you want to release your player pack far in advance so everybody can read up on the schemes and strategies, and they can familiarize themselves before the game if they want to invest the time to do so. So that's the biggest downside, I think, is it can be a little bit challenging. But if you're playing a lot of Malifaux, to me this format blows everything else out of the water. I think it's just incredible, really good, and it addresses a lot of balance issues, which I think is really important. So let's go into some weirder variety of formats. First off, let's talk about Scorpius and its variants. So first off, traditionally Scorpius, you've got Iron Scorpius, which is people cannot use the same master twice. So for instance, if you use Molly in round 1 of a tournament, you can't use her in round 3 or round 4 or whatever. If you have a 5-round tournament, you're using 5 different masters. There's Golden Scorpius, which is even more intense. You cannot use the same model twice up to its plentiful limit. So Mad Dog, for instance, you're only getting to use once an entire tournament. Where say Rabble Risers, you could potentially use 3 of them in a tournament because there's 3 in their plentiful limit. Um, so it's I think this is a really cool format. It's really interesting, but I find that it's actually worse for game balance, which is kind of surprising. But the reason for that is OP stuff stands out more, and the reason for that is say if let's say for instance that every faction has about 1 or 2 overpowered masters, which I think roughly true. Um, if that's the case, if you use your overpowered master, but then you end up facing the other person's overpowered stuff every single round, that's going to suck. For instance, you might be playing Rezzers and you end up paired against Arcanist 4 times and they play Damien 4 times. Or you might have like a Damien, a Shenlong, a Toll, and then a Perdita, for instance, or whatever. So you might experience a thing where you end up having to play these really unbalanced matchups where you've used up all your good ones, and somehow every single round you're facing good ones. And I've heard of that happening to people, and it basically comes down to the luck of the matchup lottery, which is very, very tricky for game balance. I think Scorpius is actually an incredible format when you are when you're playing it if the game is balanced. So if you manage to create a balanced pool, which we'll talk a bit about later, I think Scorpius then becomes very, very interesting, because if every faction has 8 solid masters, or 5 or 6 or 7 solid masters, with nothing being overpowered, suddenly Scorpius is very, very interesting, and that's when I think it's kind of worth experimenting with. The So yeah, so that's the Scorpius format. I also think it's a really good thing to do as a challenge for people. So for instance, if you're organizing tournaments, you can set up a prize for the highest ranked Scorpius player, or if anybody happens to play Golden Scorpius, you give them a prize, and so you make sure you have enough prizes that you can give out enough Golden Scorpius prizes, or the highest ranked 5 Golden Scorpius players, or whatever. And that's just a good way to include these formats, because I think they're really, really interesting, but I think they can kind of suck if you're forced to stick to it and you end up getting really bad matchups. So I think Scorpius formats are generally best when they're voluntary, and then people can play whatever they need to. There's also a modified Scorpius format, which I think is worth a shout out here. And the way this works is it only bans a master if you win with the master. And I think it's a little bit nicer, so people who are losing lots don't get their masters banned. I think the balance issues are still going to be there, but I think it's a really cool, really interesting format. I would happily participate in a modified Scorpius event. So next up, let's talk about bans and variants. So the ideas of bans are, of course, you get to ban stuff. So in bans, you declare your master, any master you want, and then somebody can ban you from using an out of keyword. Or in master bans, you can, before masters are declared, you choose one enemy master to ban. So for the ban format, I find the balance still gets very wonky. And because the problem is, there's 2 problems. First off, a lot of these super powerful keywords, they don't actually need that much out of keyword support, and so I'm mentioning Damien a lot, but he's the one. In Madness, I have a lot of opinions about Madness content. Damien is the only one that I've seen enough games of that I have an informed opinion. So there's lots of masters in Madness I think might be broken. Damien is the only master that I know is broken in Madness, and I know I'll get some pushback from some circles, but I think he warps the game a bit. So if you're playing the bans format, people can still just play keyword Damien, and then you'll have Lucius without access to his out of keyword picks. I think it just does not hit masters in a fair and even way. And on top of that, it does favor masters who do happen to have a specific counter. So for instance, back before English Ivan was nerfed, it would allow him to ban Anna Lovelace and Eric, making him even more unstoppable than he already was. So sometimes broken masters that have a couple of counters suddenly don't have to worry about their counters anymore, and that's I think that's generally not desirable from that perspective. And again, bans is a really, really cool format if you have a balanced pool of models to work with, and then the banning becomes more about teching and metagame choices. And I think bans this format is really, really interesting when the game is balanced. But if you don't have a balanced game, which I don't think the current standard format is, I think it exaggerates the balance problems, which is an issue. Master bans, the single biggest issue I have for it is players may only pack 1 or 2 masters for a tournament, so it's really, really bad for travel. And for that reason alone, I do not recommend ever using this for a physical tournament, because it just really messes with people who only want to pack 1 or 2 masters. It's also poorly balanced because some factions have 2 OP masters. So, for instance, if Tiri in Outcasts ends up being overpowered and Von Schill ends up being overpowered in the new format, then you're going to look at that and be like, well, no matter who I ban, I'm still going to be facing a really strong master. But if my faction only has 1 overpowered master, then suddenly I'm at a disadvantage. And so, again, I think it makes balance worse. Yeah, so the Masters ban, I think, is that you'd have to have very, very specific circumstances, like a balanced format, and if you're playing on Vassal, or if there's no people traveling for your tournament, maybe it'll be okay. Keyword restrictions. This is a really popular one, and so as the current Wyrd official one is the limited format. You get 4 slots that you use for out of keywords and versatiles. I think the advantage of this is it's got really good thematics. It can help for thematic events, but it's got worse balance. It favors those stronger keywords, as I said before, whether that's like pre-nerf Yan Lo has a very strong keyword, and Damien has a very strong keyword again. So a lot of the masters that are the most powerful in the game, part of the reason they're so powerful is their keyword is so strong, and this just rewards those masters even more. I find that um, I find that really disappointing. I don't like it competitively at all. I think that it knocks out effectively what I find keyword restrictions do is they end up banning the masters that don't have a good keyword, and you reduce the variety in your game of the masters that you play. And I always remember there was a guild player who was really, really keen on keyword restrictions, and they organized a tournament, and then after the tournament they were like, oh, this is actually horrible. And because the guild is perfectly able to compete in a keyword restricted environment, but what they found is that out of their 16 titles, they were only playing 4 or 5 of them because the rest of them were needing to do an out of keyword. So there's just a lot of titles out there that don't work in keyword, and this format effectively bans them, which I think is really, really unfortunate. But it's good for thematics. It can help for thematic events. If you're running story events, if you're running narrative events, you're running new player events, that's when I would pull out the keyword restrictions, especially for new players who don't own a lot of their factions. Having keyword restrictions does even out some things, and you're probably playing at the level where game balance doesn't matter as much because players aren't playing crews to their fullest anyway. So I think new player events, thematic events, keyword restrictions are really, really great, and they do add a lot to the game. But if you're looking for cutthroat competitive play, I would avoid them. Now let's talk about Balancefaux. And full disclosure, I am the creator of this format, so of course I'm going to think it's awesome. What I'm going to try to do here then is I'm going to convey what the format is. I'll try to convey why I think it's good and what some of the problems are, and then everyone can make up their own minds. So Balancefaux, the original idea of Balancefaux way back when I first developed it, and it's grown past that now, is I noticed that the errata cycle was such that new broken content would release, and then they would nerf the old broken content. So for instance, Malifaux Burns released with Nexus 2 being super, super powerful, super overpowered, but then they went and nerfed Nexus 1. And then Madness content released, Damien came out, and then Nexus 2 got nerfed. So this is a problematic cycle. And they tend to do 20 or 30 errata at the time, and then that content is all balanced. So the theory was basically that, well, what if we just ban new content until it's errataed? That should balance out the game. But we had a hiccup. The latest errata only balanced about 10 cards, and normally we get about 20 or 30 errata cards at once. So it feels like this latest errata didn't quite go the full distance to getting the game balanced. So I've made some additional modifications. So here's the rules of the format. The rules of the format is that all content from Madness of Malifaux is banned, and all Malifaux Burns versatiles are banned. So Madness of Malifaux is, of course, all those new keywords like Toll, Damien, Tiri, etc. And then the Arcanist starter box, and I believe the Ten Thunder starter box are going to be in that format. Yaksha's, White Eyes, a few other things like that. They're all in the Madness of Malifaux book. Then I also have banned all Malifaux Burns versatiles. This is the most controversial part of the format, there's lots of discussion on the forums, so I won't go into it too much. But that I think is the hot topic. But basically, I don't think those models are very balanced. So those have been removed. And the goal was here, as I kept tinkering, and the goal was that I wanted to get to a pool of models that I felt you could have balanced games with. And we've got 640 cards or so remain with this format. Go absolutely wild with them. I've been playing a lot of Balancefaux games. And it's been really fun. I've especially been playing Balancefaux with the all format, and it feels like there's nothing where I just lose automatically because my opponent declared it. And to me, that's the best feeling in Malifaux is when you don't feel like you lose because your opponent declared a specific thing. I think that you end up with some really great games here. Um, so. So to outline sort of the ups and downs of the format, it aims to be balanced. If the format isn't balanced, it's a failure of a format. The other formats, they don't say that their key goal is being balanced. So if they're not balanced, they're not a failure. With Balancefaux, it's right there in the name. If the format is not balanced, it's a failure. And so that's why I had to go those extra steps and reduce it to the 640 cards. The biggest thing is, again, it's clunky. Most people don't find the banned content intuitive, and uh, so they don't like that. So I think a lot of people focus on the madness content of the Malifaux versatiles being banned, and they focused on what's missing from the format, and that makes the format feel bad. But if you play a game with it and you focus on the 640 cards that you're able to play with this format, I found that the format feels incredible. I've really enjoyed playing this, and if people want to give it a go, that's great. I've made this hoping that the community will benefit from this, but I also made this format for me and my locals because we really enjoy these games. So if other people don't like this, that's okay. It doesn't have to be your cup of tea. And the final thing I want to say about it is that I feel this format manages to be fair, which is super important. Because every time I bring up having developed this format, people say, why don't you just make a list of all the overpowered masters and ban them? And I'm like, well, if I made a list of overpowered stuff, would you trust it? If I, as a Resurrectionist player, said, I think that Yannick is overpowered, but Whiston and enslaved spirits are balanced. Like that's not fair. That's not something that would be reasonable. I can't go to a guild player and say your guild mage is overpowered, but my model and my Von Stuck is balanced. Like that's just not reasonable. I felt so. I tried to do it by batches, and I tried to be very mindful of like at least being conscious of, even if I think if something is overpowered, if it's received in errata, then I'm going to say, okay, that's probably balanced. But the Malifaux Burns versatiles, I don't think they were part of their errata, largely because only 10 cards were errataed. I know this is controversial. There'll be lots of opinions on that. So that's the format. If you want to enjoy this format, try playing it. Focus on the 640 cards that remain, and I think you'll have a very fun time. If you want to like have some spicy conversations, there's some fun rants to be had about what I've chosen to ban here. So there's lots of funny conversations going on about that. And I certainly I acknowledge this is the most clunky format that has ever been proposed for Malifaux. So I understand that it's clunky and it's worth making fun of for that. It's also really interesting because you can combine it with other formats. So I've been playing Balancefaux GG All, and to be honest, it's the most fun I've had with Malifaux in a long time. Balancefaux GG All is very cool. It has so much variety. It feels very balanced. I'm really loving those formats. You could also do now that I've made what I think is probably a balanced pool of cards. I would happily play this with Scorpius. I would happily play this with those other formats we were talking about, like bands, etc. All of those I think would pair really well with the Balancefaux format. So if anybody does try combining those, I absolutely would love to hear about those. You can contact Maniacal Cackle on the forums or on Discord. Very keen to hear about if anybody does experiment with this format. And for a lot of people, this format's not your cup of tea. I've tried to outline a lot of weird official formats above, and you can stick to those, and hopefully you'll have a fantastic time as well. And then the last bonus I want to go over is here's just some interesting formats that are, I think, not quite the same as the above formats, but they're worth mentioning. First off, Double Rush, one of Malifaux's only multiplayer formats. You play 2v2, master in 10 stones, all brutal games. There's some variants where, for instance, some make totems -2 cost or whatever because they want to balance out those crews with ridiculous totems, etc. I think it sounds like a really fun casual thing. I haven't been able to do any locally, but I've heard of a nearby city doing them. They've had great success. Very, very fun. Give it a go. It sounds cool to me. Henchman Hardcore, what's appealing about it is super fast, 30 to 45-minute games. That's like incredible for Malifaux. But it's a bit awkward. A day of Henchman Hardcore is too much. Like, often you have time for a full game of Malifaux if you're sitting down for a game. Like, you don't want to drive to another location, sit down for a 30-minute game, and then drive home, right? Like, you want to play a full game. But you can fill some gaps with it. Sometimes you just have 45 minutes at an event to spare, and you're like, why don't I organize a round of Henchman Hardcore? So I think that can be worth playing a little bit. I personally quite enjoy playing that format, but it's just so awkward I never actually end up playing it because whenever I sit down to play Malifaux, I just play a full game of Malifaux. But it's pretty neat. It's pretty neat. Anyway, I hope everyone has fun in 2023. Happy New Year to everyone. Again, I want to emphasize that the Balancefaux format is something that I made specifically for players that are very similar to me. So I really hope that people out there really enjoy the format, but I am very conscious that that format is not for everyone, and that Malifaux is such an amazing, such a deep game. There are so many ways to play Malifaux that are really, really awesome. I hope that I've given you some insights into those other formats, and I hope I didn't put you off by commenting on their balance, because as I did comment, there are the bands format has a lot of some really, really interesting strategic decisions. I think the Scorpius format, when it's optional, is very, very fun. Axel in the World Series got second place in the championship, almost doing Golden Scorpius. He did do Iron Scorpius, and he almost got to Golden. What an achievement. It's such good bragging rights if you can play Scorpius. And the biggest thing from all that is I think the GG all is really, really worth having a go with. So yeah, I hope that was helpful, everyone, and we'll see you in the new year.